The indifferences in behavior exist in every job role, but the impact is particularly significant when it is from a police officer. Stupid cop accuses wrong woman? Watch further to see what happened. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more interesting yet informative videos. How does the ill behavior of police officers affect the common people? While not all police officers approach their duties with an inflated ego, the actions of the very few who do can ruin the reputation of those who are compassionate and diligent. In today's video, we're going to talk about some questionable and bad police situations. We're discussing a case where a driver got stopped by a cop for speeding, and out of nowhere, the cop accused the driver of having drugs in the car. This happened on February 18, 2023, when a police sergeant in Mississippi saw a car going too fast with windows tinted too dark. Following the usual rules, the sergeant chased the car and stopped the driver. At first, everything seemed normal during the traffic stop, with both the driver and the cop doing what they were supposed to, and nothing seeming wrong. The cop questioned in a very calm tone, and the answers to it were delivered politely. We just heard the sergeant say that the driver, Ian Alexander, was driving faster than the speed limit. It's important to mention that the officer didn't use radar to make this claim. Instead, they judged the speed by closely following the car. Many speeding tickets happen this way. Police officers follow or match the speed of a suspected speeder and use their speedometer to guess how fast they're going. But as you might expect, this method has a lot of problems, the main one being that it's not very accurate. To get an accurate speed, the officer has to stay the same distance behind the car for the entire time. If the officer doesn't keep the same distance, their speed won't match the car's speed. This method is called pacing, and when they keep a steady distance between the officer's front bumper and the suspect's rear bumper, it's sometimes called bumper pacing. So in this situation, it's likely that the sergeant didn't accurately measure Mr. Alexander's speed above the limit. But even if that's the case, it doesn't mean the sergeant can't give a ticket. Mr. Alexander has the right to challenge it in court, arguing that the sergeant made a judgment call and judgments can be debated. Take notes, dear friends. These can be useful for you to not get exploited. Well, at this point, the sergeant thought he should look into the traffic stop more. He told dispatch that Mr. Alexander seemed nervous, and he planned to ask him some questions outside the car to find out why. The sergeant was suggesting that maybe Mr. Alexander had something illegal with him. The daily interaction with criminals has led some police officers to view every common person as a potential wrongdoer, which is unfair to innocent individuals who have not committed any crimes. The unwarranted suspicion cast upon innocent people is the worst effect of this situation. In the video, the sergeant came up to the car and requested Mr. Alexander to get out for a chat. Now, you might wonder if Mr. Alexander had to say yes. Usually, the police can ask someone to step out of their car if they think a crime might have happened. In this situation, Mr. Alexander was supposedly speeding and had dark window tints, so it seems like the conditions were met. Now, here's where things change. Notice how the sergeant pointed out that Mr. Alexander seemed to be taking up all the air, suggesting he was super nervous and breathing heavily. The plot was slowly switching into something more serious. What began as a usual traffic stop was turning into something different. Then the sergeant began asking Mr. Alexander about his past interactions with the police, wondering if he had been arrested before. This seemed like an effort to find reasons to make the situation more serious. The sergeant even brought up the topic of drugs, which became significant later on. Despite that, the sergeant made it clear he wanted to look into Mr. Alexander for possible drug involvement. Strangely, the sergeant asked about Mr. Alexander's use of contacts, somehow connecting it to a suspicion of him being under the influence. Well, there are certain questions suspects are made to answer, which might seem illogical initially, but will have a significance on the plot later. Let's assume it is one of those questions. The sergeant went from thinking Mr. Alexander was possibly on drugs to suspecting there might be something illegal in his car. Then the sergeant asked if he could search the car, but Mr. Alexander said no, stating that he wouldn't allow it without a search warrant. This was a smart move, protecting Mr. Alexander's rights and stopping the sergeant from finding more reasons to arrest him, which seemed to be the sergeant's goal. Would you stand your ground like that? Despite the evident lack of legal authority for the sergeant to search Mr. Alexander's vehicle, it's important to delve into the reasons behind this. The explanation provided indicates that an officer is permitted to examine your possessions legally if certain conditions are fulfilled. These conditions include probable cause, arrest, or inventory. Probable cause arises when the officer has a belief that evidence of a crime might be discovered in your car. If an arrest occurs, officers also possess the right to search your car. Additionally, if the police impound your car and need to inventory your belongings, they don't require your permission to search it. Considering this, the only condition the sergeant might attempt to fulfill is probable cause. That's precisely what he's been working on, trying to identify reasons to believe that Mr. Alexander has drugs in his possession. At this juncture, as the sergeant faced difficulty obtaining consent to search the vehicle, he approached Mr. Alexander's fiancée, who was inside the car. Throughout the traffic stop, the sergeant requested to talk to her, and she agreed. They had a conversation about the situation, but it didn't result in anything significant. This could be viewed as another effort to discover a reason to intensify the traffic stop, given that there wasn't a real need for the sergeant to speak with Mr. Alexander's fiancée. With no success in the initial attempts, the sergeant returned to his patrol vehicle and called up several other officers to discuss the situation and request a K-9 unit. He asserted that Mr. Alexander seemed highly suspicious, but lacked sufficient evidence to advance the investigation any further. In simpler terms, the sergeant acknowledged extending the traffic stop beyond what was necessary and aimed to conclude the matter by having a K-9 inspect the vehicle. At this point, it was clearly evident that his behavior is influenced by the inflated ego. The officer suggested that if Mr. Alexander was involved in illegal activities, particularly carrying narcotics, they would eventually apprehend him. This indicated the officer's dubious motives, as he was left with no alternative but to release Mr. Alexander at that point. In the end, Mr. Alexander received citations for speeding and having tinted windows that violated the law, which he totally deserved. The sergeant could have done this a lot earlier. Alexander later uploaded a video on his YouTube channel, and he claimed that the sergeant was displeased because he mentioned having nothing illegal and refused a search of the inside of his car. Mr. Alexander offered to let the officer look inside to confirm there was nothing to hide, but insisted that the interior couldn't be searched. Mr. Alexander further mentioned that the sergeant questioned him about the presence of items hinting at narcotics, but when no K-9 unit was available, the officer had to release him. As of the recording date, Mr. Alexander has not indicated whether he plans to file a complaint or take any legal action. The presence of police officers with overbearing egos has created an environment where citizens feel the need to be well-versed in their rights to navigate daily life. Understanding the limits of police authority has become essential for a balanced and secure existence. In the current scenario, a basic legal education is not just beneficial but a necessity. It's crucial to acknowledge that not every encounter with a police officer reflects the same negative attitude. Appreciation should be extended to officers who uphold their duty with kindness and dedication. It's a reminder that professionalism should supersede personal roles when on duty. Whether it's law enforcement or any other job role, the expectation is universal. Employees should fully commit to their service, setting aside personal considerations. The intertwining of ego with power can be dangerous, especially when wielded against those with less influence. Hence, individuals must remain vigilant to safeguard their rights in such situations. Understanding and asserting your rights becomes a shield against the potentially harmful effects of unchecked authority. What are your views on this incident? Was the officer being fair to Mr. Alexander? Is the effect of ill-behaved cops bothering the citizens a lot? Let us know through comments.